Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? I'd first like to thank Dean Wolf for your hospitality and taking the lead in creating a facility and a warm welcome from Georgia State College of Law. I'd also like to thank Evangeline Mitchell, who, as all of you know, has tirelessly put in tons of hours, more emails that I can count and read, just trying to get this organized and getting it to the point where we're all spending some time together. I'd also like to thank and welcome my fellow speakers, President and Dean Robinson, President Wiley, and I'd also like to just thank you all for taking some time, investing your time in yourselves to be able to share what we're sharing over this two-day period, because you'll find that it's instrumental to your careers, to your life paths. And some of the things I'm going to share with you over the next few minutes will kind of bring that back home as to exactly what I mean. I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot of my career path. Like President and Dean Robinson, I'm a native New Yorker. I'm a Yankee in the South from St. Albans, Queens, and Flatbush, Brooklyn. I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia about 25 years ago. But New York is where I kind of cut my teeth. Ran the streets, and just did what I did enough to get me to the point where I knew I had to get out of the neighborhood if I just wanted to stay out of the joint. So, with that said, I went to and applied to a number of colleges, Cornell and Brown and Dartmouth and a few others. And then when I kind of went to those schools, I kind of looked at it and didn't see too many people that looked like me. Didn't really adapt to and love the culture that I saw in those universities in those towns, but I kind of fell into love with what I found up in Ithaca, New York. Even though it's in farmland, it was the people that were there. So I enrolled in and was admitted to Cornell University, and the significance of that is I was in class of 1974, which was a couple of years ago, but it was the largest class of African American students ever admitted in the university. Some of them in the administration and faculty may have regretted it, because when we got there, we let them know we were there. We demonstrated our asses off. We protested. We took over buildings. We demanded time on radio. We demanded presence in all of the major institutions around the university. And we kind of set the course. And the year that I was there was the year after the infamous Cornell Willard Straight Hall takeover, where it was the first time students on campus armed themselves with weapons to make their voices heard and also to protect themselves. So I came on the heels of that. So it was quite a tumultuous but quite an exciting period. So I was able to, after I kind of ingratiated myself into the do's and the don'ts and the infrastructure of Cornell, to kind of get very involved in not only the local community, but also all of the things that we as African American students at Cornell really held dear to ourselves, having a voice on campus, having a voice on radio. I became a disc jockey on one of the stations after we took over the station. So I did that. I promoted concerts. I did a variety of things that kind of shaped and led my path to ultimately what would take me from the 1970s to where I am today. I also found out from being a student employee in the administration building at Cornell, because I worked for one of the vice presidents, that they had a little secretive program that they didn't advertise, and it was a 6-year program to get your law degree. So I applied for that. I got into it. So instead of spending the 4 years and then the 3 years with the law school and the undergrad, I was able to get in and get out of Cornell in 6 years with a combined arts JD program. I majored in poli-sci, and then my senior year was a double year, so I doubled up as a senior in the arts college and my first year in law school. So it was a hell of a year, but at the end of the day, it saved a couple of dollars and got me out of there in 6 as opposed to 7 years. After I left Cornell University, and I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes as well, I went to work for an organization, for a company, a global international company based in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., called Fairchild Industries. They were a multi-tier defense contractor, satellite company, radio station, and media owner. And I landed in the general counsel's office, and I stayed there for a couple of years until I got the calling in my head and my brain and in my spirit to come back to New York City. So I sent out a bunch of resumes, and I landed a job as an associate with a large 50-year-old firm called Burns Jackson Miller Summit and Jacoby. Fast forward, I stayed there a couple of years, decided I really had enough of the big firm environment, really wanted to be an entrepreneur, call my own shots, work for myself, and do what I really love best, which was kind of focusing in on entertainment, sports, and media. So I stepped out, hung out my shingle, and I became of counsel with a local firm in New York City called Jones, Michael, and Chereau. So after doing that for a few years, I kind of morphed into my own practice, which I formed with another friend of mine. I specialized in entertainment. My partner, Darrell Gay, specialized in labor law, and we formed a firm down on Wall Street called Minter and Gay. Did that for a number of years until I decided I was tired of being chief cook, bottle washer, having to worry about the rent, having to worry about the salaries, having to deal with the insurance, having to deal with all the administrative issues, as well as practice law. So I kind of made my exit after we did that for about 5 years, and I became of counsel to another large firm that had 150 attorneys in it, named Phillips Nizer, Benjamin, Krim, and Ballin, that had also been around for a long time. So after a number of years doing that, I decided it was time for a little bit of a change, and relocated my family here to the ATL, and landed here in Atlanta in 1995, the year before the Olympics, and leveraged, as I'm going to talk about in a second, a relationship that affiliated me with a firm here called Sales Goodloe and Golden. Did that for a few years, and then ultimately I decided just to set up my own shop after I got admitted into the bar here in Atlanta. And then from there, pretty much did that for about the last 20 plus years, and just recently, earlier this year, I decided to and joined a firm in Atlanta here called Taylor English Duma. I'm a partner there. It's a 175 lawyer firm that practices pretty much in all disciplines of law. I still specialize in entertainment, intellectual property, media law, sports, but I have about 175 partners and associates who do everything from real estate to corporate to litigation to tax, government affairs, corporate law, trust and estate. So now I'm able to be full service for the various clients that I represent, primarily from the entertainment space initially, but branching out into all the various things that they do. Both President Wilton and President and Dean Robinson talked about service. So I tell people I have a lot of unpaid loves, a lot of unpaid jobs, and I guess service is kind of in my blood. One of my greatest loves is an organization called BESLA. We call it BESLA. It's known as the Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyers Association, which when I was 1 year into private practice on my own, and a young guy in the room decided that the 19 of us who were at a conference of the Black Music Association in Philadelphia really needed a vehicle and a mechanism that we could network, share information, share referrals, kind of learn, pull us up by our own bootstraps and get ahead in the entertainment and sports industry. So we ran around, got folks organized, and we formed BESLA. There were 19 of us in the room at the time in Philadelphia when we did it. And since I was probably the youngest in the room and maybe the most energetic, they said, all right, kid, you go ahead and get things started. So I was the first executive director for about the first 10 years of BESLA. And I can proudly say that in November, we will celebrate and hold our 39th annual conference. And what we did is we decided with BESLA just to do something a little bit different, which is to hold the annual conference outside the United States or in one of the contiguous territories of the United States. So all 39, all 38, and now 39 of our conferences have been offshore. They've either been in Hawaii or they've been in Mexico. Most of them have been in the Caribbean. This year will be in Panama City, Panama. And the reason we did that is because we wanted a concentrated opportunity for people to come over a period of 4 or 5 days and spend quality time with each other. So you can really network, get information, create relationships. Because as you know, when you're in a city environment and you're attending a conference, usually at the end of that session, the end of that day, everybody's back to their office, and it's hard to catch up with them. But if you have a captive audience based on the location, it gives you more quality time to nurture good relationships that will ultimately impact where you go. So that's why we've had our conferences, for our annual conferences, offshore, and then we have mid-year events and multiple city events all throughout the United States during the year. Another paid love is the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, which I stood on the heels of Ray Charles and Jerry Butler, and I became the third chairman of that organization a number of years ago. I currently serve as chairman emeritus, and it's an organization that provides emergency financial assistance to pioneer R&B artists that are struggling, having emergencies, and having hard times. Another love but unpaid gig is I'm on the board of directors of an organization called Sound Exchange. So for those of you that stream music, which is probably everybody in the room, the servers that you use, whether it's Pandora, XM Sirius, iHeartRadio, Tidal, any of those, they all pay money, about $1 billion a year into Sound Exchange. Sound Exchange delivers half of that money to artists who perform on those recordings, the other half to the record companies and the copyright owners who own the master recording. So I serve on that board representing the artist community, and I've been on that board for about the last 11 years. I also, as was mentioned in my introduction, I'm an instructor here in the School of Music as opposed to the School of College of Law, and I teach copyright and music publishing every spring semester in the School of Music here at Georgia State. There are a bunch of other organizations I'm involved in, but I'll just stop it at the Living Legends Foundation, which basically, like the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, provides emergency assistance grants to folks that are in the music industry, the broadcast industry, i.e. radio and television, and also folks that are in the record business, executives who are now finding themselves, unfortunately, unemployed and in need of assistance. Recently, I joined the board, and I'm one of the commissioners on the DeKalb Entertainment Commission here in Atlanta, and it's our job to bring more opportunities for all areas of entertainment into the county of DeKalb. And similarly with the Georgia Music Partners that I serve on the board of, which is designed to increase legislation favorable to the music industry in the state of Georgia. What I'd like to talk about really and focus on today is relationships. And in starting that short discussion about relationships, what I would really like each of you to do is, if there's somebody on your right or your left that you're sitting next to right now that you don't know, didn't know previous to today's session or this weekend, just introduce yourself for a quick second. Just name and just introduce yourself with a handshake. All right. Okay, folks. All righty. All right. Okay. So. Okay. Feels like a Baptist minute. What I really want to talk to you about is relationships. What I want to start off is by saying relationships rule everything in this universe. Our relationship with God, whether your spirit is God or whether it's Allah, whether your spirit is Jehovah, whoever it might be, that's first and foremost. Next is your relationship with your family, your spouse, your significant others, your siblings, various family members. Those relationships come second in terms of importance. Your relationships with your friends. Who are your friends? Who do you call friends? Who can call you friends? Who can you call when there's a problem as opposed to just having fun, and they're there to reach out and be able to give assistance, which defines true friendship. Those relationships are significant. Your social relationships, whether they're fraternities or sororities or clubs or organizations or various associations, your church, whatever you might be involved in politically, religious, or socially, those relationships are very significant. Your relationships with your colleagues, whether it's your classmates, whether it's your professors, whether it's folks that you run across with in school. If you are already out in the work field, whether it's folks that, you say, that's my boss, or that's my colleague, or that's my employee, whatever the relationship is. Everything is interconnected in this world. Our bodies are interconnected. If there's something wrong with one organ in your body, it's going to have an impact on another organ in your body because of the interconnectivity, the relationship of all the organs that keep things functioning to keep them healthy inside of our body. When one is out of whack, it affects all the others, and they may have to take up the slack. Our relationship with nature is a huge climate strike today. For folks that say, hell no, climate change does exist regardless of what this administration wants to say. We have an indelible relationship with our environment, with nature, and what we do with that ultimately impacts us. What we're doing now with climate to destroy it, to change legislation that, deals with carbon and fossil fuels, that, folks in different organizations and agencies make pass legislation and regulations behind our scenes that we may not know about, but that will ultimately impact us, impact the generations to come, because it's one planet, and it's either ours to preserve or mess up and deal with the consequences. And the reason I want to talk about relationships is because my personal life and my career as an attorney, and I feel blessed to have had the path that I have had, to be able to have done what I have done, and it gives me the courage and the incitement and the motivation and the enthusiasm to keep doing more of it. That's because of relationships. I talked about Cornell. The reason I found out about, even though I knew about Cornell, but one of the reasons I kind of really got attracted to Cornell was time I spent there. One of my homeboys went to Cornell. He was a year ahead of me. And I went up and I hung out with him and his homeboys. And I'm like, this is fun. Not only do you all go to school, but you all have really great relationships and you all are having a ball. So when I went to the other spots and didn't have that kind of connectivity, I said, this is where I want to be. So even though I applied to 5 different law schools and got admitted into all 5, it was Cornell that I wound up with, not just because, it was Cornell and had all the stuff that Cornell has to offer, but it was a relationship, it was a connectivity that I had with my homeboy and the folks that he introduced me to when I spent 4 days just kind of doing a campus visit. The relationships that I built at Cornell, literally when I was there back in the 70s, are some of the best friends and the closest friends, bar none, that I call brothers, literally, that I still have today. My roommates when I was in school are the same guys that I call my brothers. And even though they live in Washington, D.C., we talk every week and we know everything about each other's family because of the interconnectivity of those relationships that we formed over 40 years ago. After I left Cornell Law School, it was a relationships that got me into my first job at Fairchild Industries. I wasn't the brightest bulb coming out of Cornell Law School. I wasn't in the top 1% of the class. I had decent grades, but, I made it through. But it was, my relationship with my father. My father was an engineer who worked for an organization called Fairchild Industries. And he used his relationship to introduce me to the general counsel at Fairchild Industries. And because of that introduction, I went down to Washington, D.C. from Ithaca. I made an interview, and to be honest with you, it was the only job I submitted for and actually applied to and got an offer. That was my first gig coming out of law school. Relationship from me to dad to the GC to my first check, which wasn't a whole lot, but it was more than I had ever made before. So I joined Fairchild Industries as an assistant general counsel in the GC's office, and that was my first gig. After hanging out in the recording studios in Washington, D.C., and really having that DNA inside my blood, even though I wasn't a musician, I really wanted to be in the entertainment space. So I looked around, I sent a bunch of resumes up to probably at least a dozen different law firms in New York City that had an expertise in entertainment law, or they specialized, it was just an entertainment law firm. interviewed with probably 15 out of the 20 that I sent resumes to. Probably a dozen of those were like, hey, kid, you got great credentials, you come from this school, you've been involved in, aspects, we'll get back to you. One of those resumes that I sent, and the letter, I sent to a guy named Arnold Burns, who was a former Solicitor General in the Nixon administration, who had formed a firm, Burns, Jackson, Miller, Summerlin, and Jacoby on Park Avenue. Why? I sent that resume to Arnold Burns because he graduated from Cornell. And he was on the Cornell Board of Trustees. I said, Mr. Burns, I'm a fellow alum. I'm hardworking, I'm hungry, I want to join your firm as an associate. He ultimately sent that resume over to the hiring partner. And I knew it had an impact because as the hiring partner and I were talking, he got up to go to the bathroom. I kind of looked over onto his desk where my resume was, and he had already had notes. Arnold Burns' recommendation, make this happen. Relationships. I never knew Arnold Burns until I came up to the firm and met him for the first time. But we had that alumni connection. That was a symbiotic relationship that ultimately got my job, my first job in private practice as an associate in the Park Avenue firm. That was a relationship. So I leveraged that, and then I built more relationships while I was there. When I decided after I'd been there a couple of years that, I'd copied all the files I could, sat in on a whole bunch of meetings, kind of decided I got a real good sense on what the private practice of law is like, because it's very different from what I was coming from, which was the corporate side. On the corporate side, we would come in at 9, 12 o'clock, we were out to lunch, 1 o'clock, we were back at the desk, 5 o'clock, we were out the door. Private practice, you come in first thing in the morning, you may have lunch at the desk, and in our firm, it was a thing amongst the associates to see who could stay the latest, to show you were the most dedicated to the client business. And for us, it was all cool because if you stayed after 7 o'clock, you got to have dinner on the firm and you got to get a black card to take home, so you didn't have to worry about the subway. So that's what I did there. But while I was there, I met a young lady who was another lawyer who was out on her own, also from D.C., named Louise West. And she was in private practice in another firm in Manhattan. So Louise said, hey, man, you know what are you doing over there with those guys? You need to come on out and do your own thing. You really want to do entertainment. And I was an associate. I was doing entertainment. I was doing corporate. I was doing litigation, all the usual rotational kind of things that first, second, and third year associates are required to do in large corporate firms. So I said, you know what? Let me think about it. Yeah. So I stepped out on faith, and that was because of my relationship with Louise. She said, come on over here where I am. Meet these guys. We got you. So it turned out that those guys that she introduced me to, and ultimately I took a space and joined their firm as of counsel, was a firm called Jones, Michael, and Giroux. And the reason it was significant is because for those New Yorkers, it was a firm that David Dinkins came out of. It was a firm that Basil Patterson came out of. It was a firm that Charlie Rangel had friendships with, all of the serious African-American politicians. And David Dinkins, for those of you who don't know, was the first and only one-time African-American mayor of New York City. So because I joined that firm, I became their young mentee. I locked onto their bootstraps, and they took me under their wings, and I formed relationships with them that still exist decades later. And then when I decided I wanted to move to Atlanta, I said to Mayor Dinkins, I said, Dave, I'm thinking about relocating the family to Atlanta. He said, leave New York? I said, yeah, I've been here all my life. And, we're looking for a little bit of change. I want to think about Atlanta. At that time, Atlanta was popping off the map. It was mid-'90s. Outkast, Goody Mob, Tony Braxton, Usher, TLC. I'm like, hell yeah, there ain't a whole lot of competition down there. At that time, actually, there was only one other attorney in town who had a really vibrant practice, a guy named Joel Katz, who's still, very, very successful at Greenberg Trauig, and he became a friend because I interviewed to join his firm. But I was introduced by David Dinkins to a brother here in Atlanta. His name was Maynard Jackson. So So Maynard said, hey, you a friend of David's? Come on down, kid. So I sat with Maynard. Maynard became my mentor here in Atlanta. First day I moved in. Relationships. Maynard said, don't worry about those guys. These are my guys. They came from Powell Goldstein. They all practiced together. They had relationships. So he said, my guys are Sales Goodlow and Golden. They do all of the municipal bond work for the city of Atlanta. Go work, set up your shop, hang out your shingle with them. I said, why not? This is Maynard. He's the mayor of the city of Atlanta. Why should I say no? So that relationship got me into being of counsel at Sales Goodlow and Golden. And then things just kind of evolved one after another. It's a variety of relationships that got me into clients. I mean, I haven't advertised for clients probably in about 20 years. And that's not to boast. It's just because you do things, you put your name out there, you stand on your reputation, but you work your relationships. One of the high spots that and I've had many, but just one of the recent high spots that I've really had, which is why I tell people I don't have a real job, I just have fun, is I represent 3 of the 5 members of the Central Park 5. So for those of you who might have seen the Netflix, hopefully Emmy-nominated film called When They See Us, produced by Ava DuVernay, I did the deal for the Central Park 5 with Ava DuVernay and Netflix. But the reason I did that was because of a relationship. I didn't represent the Central Park 5 back in the day, back in the 90s and early 2000s when they were serving time and going to jail and fighting the system and ultimately going to the Court of Appeals and getting a $45 million judgment for their wrong. That was a guy named Michael Warren, Tarif Warren. He was their civil rights attorney. I knew him back from New York because of David Dinkins. So Mike, once they got their judgment, said, there's some people buzzing around that want to do their life story. You're an entertainment guy. I know you from New York, because he was still in New York then. He said, would you represent him? I said, hell yeah. So ultimately, I took on the representation of 3 of the 5 members, Kevin, Antron, and Raymond of the Central Park 5. And I did that deal with Ava and her attorneys and with Netflix. And I guess the rest is history. Hopefully Sunday night they will walk across the stage with an Emmy. Fast forwarding to my partnership with Taylor English, which is what I just embarked on and joined the firm back in January. Relationships. I wasn't really aware of what Taylor English did internally. I knew the name because there was a 175 lawyer firm here, pretty substantial in the city of Atlanta. But I don't do litigation. I'm a transactional attorney. I do deals. I have fun. I don't go to court. So not that litigation is a bad part of the profession. I just, I'm not trying to be a warrior from Scandal. I like to do deals. So my warrior that I would refer stuff to every time it came up to be a litigation matter was a guy named Alan Clark. And I met him literally 1 year after I had moved to Atlanta because he was representing a manager. I was representing a group called the Goody Mob, and they were doing this. So we sat across the table from each other as adversaries in an arbitration, and when it was over, we shook hands and said, hey, high five, catch you on the next go-round. But we respected each other, so we developed a relationship. And over the last 20 years, anytime a Georgia-based litigation that's in the entertainment space comes up, I'd refer it to Alan. So Alan joined Taylor English a couple of years ago, and then after I referred a bunch of business to Taylor English, he said, hey, man, you know what? You should really take a look at the firm. They're different. It was that relationship with Alan that got me to say, ultimately, after I did my due diligence and pulled the threads up off the sheets to really figure out what's below the surface, and I said, I like what I see, I decided, yeah, I'll become a partner. But that was initiated because of my relationship with a colleague. So what I just want to say to you is moving your careers forward. Relationships rule. Networking is pivotal to career development. Don't be afraid to reach out and talk to somebody that you may not know. Like Dean Robinson said earlier in her presentation, they called on the AG's office. They called on the EEOC's commission. They didn't know them, but they were fearless to reach out anyway and say, hey, would you? And the answer was yes. You have to take those steps. As long as you feel in your heart and your spirit that is correct, follow your instinct, follow your inner mind. Educational components such as seminars, conferences. I'm a member of Beasler. I'm a member of the NBA, and I was fortunate enough about 4 years ago to be recognized by the NBA with their Legendary Entertainment Attorney Lifetime Award. I'm a member of the ABA, so I network. I go to the seminars. I'll sit in the seminar just like you all are sitting today, just taking notes. And if it's folks that I don't know, after the seminar, I'm up, hey, here's my card, can we talk? It's not just enough to pass a card or pass a little piece of information that you have somebody's name and number. It's what you do with it. What do you do with it after that event? How do you reconnect with that person so there's significance in that introduction? That's where the rubber meets the road. Not that you got a whole pile of cards at home that people don't know who the hell you are and you barely remember where you got the card from. It's what do you do with it? How do you develop? How do you nurture? How do you cultivate that relationship so that it has meaning and significance and an ultimate lifetime impact in your space? Nurture them. Don't take relationships for granted, and life will bless you as a result. Thank you.